Her daughter would not let go of the stranger at the well. She said he felt like home. The well was at the crossroads, a quarter-mile south of Cora Dunlap's farmhouse. And Cora went to the well every morning at 7, because the well was the only source of water for a mile in any direction, and because the morning was the coolest part of the day, and because hauling water in the heat of a Texas afternoon in August was a punishment she did not need to add to the list of punishments that life had already assigned her. The walk was a quarter-mile each way, and the bucket was heavy when full, and the path was rutted and uneven, and she made the walk twice a day, because a farm requires water the way a body requires breath, constantly, and without the option of doing without. She brought her daughter, Pearl, because Pearl was 4 years old and could not be left alone in the house, because 4-year-olds are creative in their self-endangerment, and because the one time Cora had left Pearl alone for 10 minutes, Pearl had climbed onto the kitchen table and pulled a shelf of canning jars down on herself. And the jars had not broken, but the shelf had, and the lesson had been learned. Pearl was a quiet child, small for her age, with dark hair that curled at the ends and serious brown eyes that watched everything. She had been quiet since her father died, which was 11 months ago, which was most of Pearl's memory, because the memories of a 4-year-old do not reach far, and the memories that do reach are not the ones a parent would choose. Pearl's father had been Emmett Dunlap, a farmer who had been killed when his horse threw him on the road to town, and he had landed on a rock, and the landing had been the kind that does not allow for recovery, or farewell, or any of the things that a dying man should be allowed. Which is to say, it was sudden, and it was permanent, and it left Cora standing in the dooryard at 26 years old, with dirt on her hands, and a husband who would never come home, and a farm she could not run alone, and a daughter who had stopped talking for 3 months, and who had started again, but who talked less than she had before, and who watched strangers with the particular wariness of a child who has learned that people leave. The stranger at the well was there on a Tuesday morning in August of 1883. He was sitting on the stone rim of the well with a canteen in his hand and a horse tied to the post, and the road dust of several days on his clothes and his hat and his boots. He was tall and lean and sunburned across the nose and the backs of his hands, and weathered in the way of men who work outdoors, and who have been working outdoors for long enough that the outdoors has become part of their skin, baked in and permanent. His name was Judson, though Cora did not know that yet. What she knew was that there was a man at her well, which was not her well exactly, but which she thought of as her well, because she was the one who used it most, and the man was drinking from it without asking, which was not an offense, because the well was communal, but which was notable, because strangers at the crossroads were not common, and because the stranger was looking at her with the calm, unhurried gaze of a man who is in no particular rush to be anywhere. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Cora said. Pearl, who was holding Cora's hand, did not say anything. Pearl looked at the stranger. She looked at him the way children look at things they are trying to understand, which is directly and without the social filters that adults use to disguise the looking. She looked at him for a long time, and then she let go of Cora's hand and walked to the stranger and took hold of his trouser leg and held on. Cora stared. Pearl did not touch strangers. Pearl did not approach strangers. Pearl barely touched people she knew. The fact that Pearl had crossed the distance between Cora and this man and had grabbed his leg and was holding on with the grip of a child who has found something she does not intend to release was so far outside the pattern of Pearl's behavior that Cora could not process it immediately and stood with her empty bucket and her mouth slightly open and her understanding of her daughter rearranging itself around this new and inexplicable data. "Pearl," Cora said. "Pearl, come here." Pearl did not come. Pearl held on. She looked up at the stranger with an expression that Cora recognized, though she had not seen it on Pearl's face in 11 months, which was trust. Simple, unreasoned, absolute trust, the kind that children give to the people they decide are safe. A decision that is made by a mechanism that adults do not understand, and that children do not explain, because the mechanism operates below language, in the place where instinct lives. Judson looked down at the child attached to his leg. He looked at her with an expression that was not confusion and not amusement, but something gentler than either, something that suggested he understood what was happening, even if he could not explain it. And he did not pull away or laugh or dismiss the grip, but simply let it be, the way a man lets a thing be when he recognizes that the thing is important, even if he does not know why. "She yours?" he asked Kora. "She is. She does not usually do this. She does not usually touch anyone. She seems certain about it. She does." They stood there, the three of them, in the soft early morning light at the crossroads, well, with the cicadas already starting in the grass. Kora with her bucket, Judson on the well rim, Pearl attached to his leg like a vine to a fence post. And the moment lasted long enough for all three of them to understand that something had happened that was outside the normal sequence of events, and that required a response that none of them had prepared. "I am sorry," Kora said. "Pearl, let go of the man." Pearl shook her head. She shook it with the determination of a child who has made a decision, and who will not be moved from it by reason or authority, or embarrassment. "He feels like home," Pearl said. It was the most words Pearl had said to a stranger since her father died. It was, as far as Kora could remember, the most words Pearl had said to anyone in a single sentence in 11 months. The words landed in the morning air with a weight that was disproportionate to their size, the way a child's words always land, because children do not understand the weight of what they say, and therefore say things that adults spend years trying to say, and never quite manage. Kora felt her eyes fill. She did not cry because she was standing at a crossroads with a stranger, and crying at crossroads was not something she did. But she felt the tears, and she let them sit, and she looked at her daughter holding on to this man's leg, and she understood that Pearl had found something that Pearl needed, and that the finding was not rational, and not planned, and not something Kora could have arranged, but was, nevertheless, real. Judson Crale was a cattle drover. He was 31, from a ranch in the Brazos country, and he had been moving a small herd north to the railhead in Abilene, and had fallen behind the drive because his horse had thrown a shoe, and the shoeing had cost him a day, and the day had turned into 2, because the farrier in the last town was drunk, and could not work until he was sober, and could not become sober until he slept, and could not sleep until the drunk had run its course. He was headed north to rejoin the drive, and he had stopped at the well because his canteen was empty, and his horse was thirsty, and the crossroads well was the only water for a mile. He had not planned to stop longer than the time it took to fill the canteen. He had not planned for a 4-year-old girl to grab his leg and refuse to let go. He had not planned for the look on the girl's mother's face, which was a look he recognized because he had seen it on the faces of mothers before. The look of a woman who is holding everything together by force of will, and who is watching the force of will approach its limit. He recognized it because his own mother had worn that look when his father had died of fever on a ranch in the Brazos Bottoms when Judson was 9, and his mother had run the ranch alone for 3 years after that, and the running had been heroic, and the cost of the heroism had been visible in her face every evening when she sat down at the table and could not eat because she was too tired to lift a fork. And the recognition connected him to this woman and this child in a way that was immediate and involuntary, and that he did not resist, because resisting it would have required him to pretend he had not seen what he had seen. "Is there something needs fixing?" he asked. He asked it casually, the way a man asks when he is offering help and wants the offering to feel light, so the person can accept it without feeling the weight of obligation. Kora looked at him. She looked at him the way a woman looks at an offer she needs but does not want to need, because needing help is an admission that the independence she has been performing for 11 months is a performance, and that the performance is wearing thin. "The fence on the east pasture is down. The barn door is off its hinge. The porch step is cracked. She stopped. She stopped because the list was long, and the listing of it was exposing the condition of her life in a way that felt raw. "I can start with the fence," Judson said. He stayed that day. He fixed the fence. He fixed it with the efficiency of a man who has built and repaired fences on ranches since he was old enough to hold a post-hole digger, and the fence, when he was finished, was better than it had been when Emmett built it, not because Emmett had been a poor builder, but because Emmett had been a farmer, and Judson was a rancher, and ranchers build fences the way sailors tie knots, with the expectation that the work will be tested by forces stronger than the work itself. Pearl followed him. She followed him to the fence and sat in the grass and watched him work with the focused attention of a child who is watching someone she has decided belongs to her. She did not speak much. She did not need to. She was there, and the being there was the point. And Judson understood that the being there was the point because he had been a quiet child himself after his father died, and he knew that quiet children are not empty children, but children who are watching and deciding, and who will speak when they have decided what to say. He fixed the barn door the next morning, rehinging it with iron hardware he had in his saddlebag. He fixed the porch step that afternoon. He stayed for supper because Kora invited him, and because Pearl had taken his hand when he started toward his horse, and had held it with the grip that he now understood was not a grip, but a request, and the request was, stay. He sent word to the cattle drive that he would not be rejoining. He sent it with a rider headed north, and he did not explain, because explanations of this kind, I stopped at a well and a child grabbed my leg and I cannot leave, do not translate well into messages carried by third parties. The drive would manage without him. Drives always managed. What would not manage without him was a 4-year-old girl who had not touched anyone in 11 months, and who had chosen him, by a mechanism that he did not understand, and did not need to understand, as the person she would trust. He stayed through the harvest. He stayed through the fence mending and the barn raising, and the well digging, and the 100 small repairs that accumulate on a farm when the farmer is gone, and the farmer's wife is trying to do the work of 2 people with the hands and the hours of 1. He worked without being asked, because asking would have required Kora to admit that she needed help, and Judson understood that the admission was harder than the work, and so he simply did the work, and let the work speak for itself. Kora fell in love with him the way people fall in love when they are not looking for it, gradually, and then suddenly, and then with the realization that the gradually had been happening for longer than the suddenly suggested. She fell in love with the way he spoke to Pearl, which was the way a person speaks to someone they respect, not the way adults typically speak to children, which is down. She fell in love with the way he fixed things, which was thoroughly and without complaint, and with the particular patience of a man who believes that anything worth doing is worth doing, so it will not need to be done again. She fell in love with the way he sat on the porch in the evenings and looked at the land as though the land were worth looking at, which it was, but which Kora had stopped noticing because the land had become synonymous with the work the land required, and the work had become synonymous with the exhaustion the work produced. Judson proposed in October. He proposed on the porch, in the evening, with Pearl asleep inside, and the stars overhead, and the particular silence of rural Texas that is not silence at all, but the sound of insects, and wind, and distance. I did not plan to stay, he said. I know, but I am staying, and I would like to stay in a way that means something, in a way that is permanent. Pearl chose you, Kora said. I am not sure you get to leave. I am not trying to leave. I am trying to stay properly. They married in November, on a cool, clear day with the pecan trees turning gold, at the church in the nearest town, and Pearl stood between them during the ceremony and held both their hands, one in each of hers, and the minister said later that he had never seen a child so still and so certain during a wedding, and Kora said that Pearl had been certain since the well, and that the wedding was just the rest of them catching up. Judson built Pearl a rocking horse that Christmas. From mesquite wood he had cured and sanded and oiled until the grain shone, and Pearl rode that horse every day for the next 4 years, and when she outgrew it, she put it on a shelf in her room, where she could see it from her bed, because some things are not outgrown even when the body outgrows them, and some choices made at Crossroads wells on Tuesday mornings in August turn out to be the most important choices a person will ever make, even when the person making them is 4 years old and cannot explain why.